Hello there my Gummy Knights and welcome back to Echo Chamber, and I want to first start off this video by giving everyone a warm Merry Christmas. Because we don't do that happy holiday shit in my house, it's definitely the Lord's Day, and so that's what we're going to be celebrating. So when I say Merry Christmas, I do mean Merry Christmas. If you got a problem with that, you can go ahead and step right out. Anyway, aside from that controversial reading, we're going to be getting into a very special video today as a Christmas celebration, and we're going to be delving into a special tier character who's going to be fighting another character who you guys pretty much know well, because he is kind of the basis for my entire channel at this point. Pretty much everything surrounding this character has something related to do with me. I'm just not going to sit here and lie. I wanted to do this to try to have a little bit of fun on Christmas Day and give you guys all of a gifts and celebration. So, with that being said, we're going to be talking about none other than jolly old Saint Nick. Now, I'm not talking about the patron saint, Saint Nicholas. I am, however, talking about the character which is based on him, that being none other than Santa Claus. And we're going to be deciding here today who would win in a death battle if these two characters came to blow, that being Santa Claus versus none other than the inspiration for thousands of young boys and grown men all cupping their hands together and firing energy waves off into the air while screaming the most iconic phrase to ever exist inside of anime, none other than the Monkey King himself, Sun Wukong. No, I'm just kidding. I'm talking about the guy who was inspired by Sun Wukong, of course, that being Son Goku. Now, the way I'm going to break this video down is within the structures of the same type of versus tier system that you're going to be very familiar with by this point if you watch anything related to my channel and seen versus battles, or if you watch anything related to the many other channels who do versus content out there. Specifically, we're going to break down the stats of each character, see how they match up to each other, where they counter each other, and ultimately decide a victor. Of course, it's going to be within a neutral space, so some abilities may be more applicable than others, considering that these characters do have a myriad of techniques and abilities that could otherwise affect a normal story if we were to plop them into each other's verses. And since we're not going to be doing that, they're going to be within a neutral space, some of those abilities may not apply altogether, or they may apply to a more minor or lesser degree. And before we go any further, I do want to give you guys a bit of a brief history lesson in regards to a general synopsis of Saint Nicholas himself. It's not going to be a super deep dive, otherwise we'd be here for hours and this video would extend all the way into New Year's. And let's be honest, nobody's going to stay here and watch a video that long. But I did want to at least give you guys somewhat of historical context as to why Santa may have been inspired, of course, by the patron saint. Now, some of you may already know a lot of stuff I'm going to go over in this brief excerpt, so if you're familiar with it already, you can go ahead and give me any corrections that I may have made. But if this is your first time hearing it, I want you to sit back, relax, and kind of enjoy a brief history on the man who inspired a legend and one of the greatest mythological characters to ever exist within our time. Saint Nicholas is a very fascinating character, a character who is shrouded in mystery. As with most people who exist within the ancients or in ancient times, depending on the status of the person, can be said to have a lot of things that they are associated with, or things that are attributed to them, be relegated between the very short thin line of fact and reality, with Saint Nicholas being all the same, as a lot of the stories surrounding what he is best known for, that being of course his immense generosity, are not as well documented as we would like them to be. For all intents and purposes, any of the amount of stories that could be said to have been true or real can also been said to have been exaggerated or faked. The history is super weird like that. But there are a few things that are indisputable when it comes in regards to this historical figure, as we are able to have a strong approximation, if not an outright definitive set of factoids regarding his life and career, and overall general impact on history itself. Some of you may have believed that he hailed from one of the more northern or Eastern European regions of the world, such as the English region, or maybe even Welsh, or perhaps even Germanic. And don't get me wrong, I've done a bit of my research and have looked into this quite a lot, and that's usually the type of regions that people think that he originates from. This is due to the character Santa Claus himself being often associated with those regions in regards to people's understanding of origin of the character of Santa Claus. And so of course by the association to the character of Santa Claus having some of its earliest roots within those regions in terms of the character's image or likeness or stories about the character being propagated there, most people try to associate the origin of the original person, of course, to those regions. Hell, you may even get a lot of people who still unironically assume that Christmas and everything related to old Saint Nick, and even Saint Nicholas himself, are from a more Nordic tradition, or any type of tradition that would have practiced more paganist beliefs in regards to around Christmas. I mean, this couldn't be further from the truth, but of course, this is what people believe and associate with it. But I'm of course going to tell you that every single person who does believe that is of course wrong. This is because Saint Nicholas is actually of Greek origin and descent, Licinian to be more specific, and was born in Patara in 270 AD around March 15th. Patara being on the Turkish coast near the village of Gilemes, which is within the Antila province. And an even greater fun fact, Patara used to actually be the capital of Lycia. And I do want to take the time to apologize if I may have butchered any of those names. Moving right along, in his day, St. Nicholas actually did do a bit of traveling to places like Egypt and Mara, another Licinian city, where he attained his bishopship. He was actually very dedicated towards Christ, it being the most prominent inspiration for his philosophy going forward in regards to giving out towards the poor, which is a specific association that is known with Santa Claus, although be it more commercialized, where Santa does give out gifts to anybody regardless of their race, gender, or creed. St. Nicholas was actually the inspiration for that, given the fact that regardless of anyone's standing in life, he would often be the one trying to help out in regards to giving what they may not have had towards them and following with the teachings of Jesus, that you should help and aid those who are often less fortunate than you. In fact, in the city of Lycinia, that being Myra, he does have a church named directly after him. But his devotion to our Lord Jesus Christ will ultimately pave the way for a bit of suffering that he ultimately ended up enduring within his life. That being the fact that, like many Christians, he was imprisoned by Emperor Diocletian. And trust me, this guy had a real hate boner for Christians. But thank the Lord, because luckily for our boy, he was ultimately freed by Emperor Constantine, who had a far more favorable view and outlook on them. And I would recommend to anybody to look up the relation that Constantine actually had with Christendom, because it's actually a fascinating tale in regards to his relation with the entirety of the religion, and the great influence he had in it thereof. But I think one more great fact about this is the fact that St. Nicholas actually attended the Great Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. And don't worry, like I said, if I were to get into the long history of something like the Council of Nicaea, we'd be here for hours. In fact, there are dedicated hour-long videos, even greater than hour-long videos, on the subject. So if you guys are interested in that, you can go ahead and look at that. This is a brief examination of St. Nicholas himself. Speaking of which, the last thing I want to touch on and related to that before we move on is somewhat going over, of course, what he is most generally known for, and that being his generosity. Like I said at the beginning, the stories do vary and sometimes can be a bit more exaggerated than what they intend to be, but we do know for a fact that he was someone who was also known as the patron saint, that being the likes of thieves and other cutthroats. This because he often used his generosity and preaching of the word in order to help reform a lot of these people. He himself have coming to know a lot of them upon his imprisonment. But this isn't the only type of sinner that he is associated with. That means sometimes he is even considered the patron saint of prostitutes. Not in a devious or sexual manner, no, but because he would often try to help these girls, especially those that have been sold into slavery, and even just women who were among the poor, where he would often give out gold to them, especially to those who often didn't have or even lost their dowries. And of course the one that most ties him to Santa, that being the giving of gifts unto children. But unlike the actual Santa, he wasn't sneaking down into people's chimneys in the middle of the night, eating their milk and cookies, or writing catchy jingles about how he sees them when they're sleeping and he knows when they're awake. And look, I'm not of the mind of anything related to cancel culture, but you can understand why some people, especially in a modern context, might find that a bit iffy. All in all, that is to say that not only was St. Nicholas a very influential person within inside of Christianity, but also a great influence to the world at large. May you rest in peace, brother, and enjoy the company of our Lord, and I do hope to see you when I get up there someday. That out of the way, we're going to go ahead and get right back into the crux of this video, which is of course the fight between Santa Claus and Goku. Who will come out on top in this epic battle? So the character of Santa Claus, or the persona of Santa Claus I will actually be using, is the one from none other than Marvel Comics. We're going to be strictly utilizing that one because he does have a more consistent frame of reference in terms of the totality of his powers. And when I was doing my research on different types of Santa Clauses within different verses and within different fictions, he was the one that kind of piqued my interest a little bit because there is a good standard of abilities and he does have a good standard of feats that you can kind of measure off of. Don't get me wrong, there are most likely out there in the ether, I haven't researched all of them, Santas that are far stronger, but for the most part I think that the most rounded one that I want to utilize, because I think he's actually pretty interesting to utilize in this case, would be the Santa from Marvel Comics. And because one of the actual abilities that the character has, that being the fourth wall breaking ability, much like the way that Deadpool has, another reason I chose him is because out of all the ones I looked up, he seems to be the only one, or at least again, out of the ones I looked up, you guys can correct me if there's another one, but he seems to be the only one that I saw who has that unique ability, and it kind of wanted to make me draw him in a little bit more, because I think that that helps elevate towards the idea of consistency, because we're going to be using Marvel Comics stretching back to even before Marvel was called Marvel Comics, and when they had other publications attached to them, in which they feature Santa Claus. Because he not only makes reference to them throughout the comics, but also it does involve several abilities that his character has been able to consistently use, and so that's why I wanted to go with that, because it does give you a broad range of Santa to use, but it also keeps it concise enough to where you can recognize that there's a pattern to which you can utilize certain abilities, certain skills. Now there is a bit of inconsistency within his overall strength and power. It does fluctuate, but another reason I wanted to use the Santa is because his fluctuation from a low end or consistent end to a high end is absolutely ridiculous. We'll get more into it later, but just kind of give you guys a sneak peek, this Santa in Marvel Comics can range anywhere from country level to potentially even multi-universal, or even higher than that. And you'll see what I mean as we get into it. Now, regarding the stats of Santa Claus, we're actually going to be taking two variations. We're going to be taking him at his absolute high end of what he could potentially be. Now, of course, this incorporates any type of leeway or potentially wank that you can also give him, but just in relation to what he can absolutely be at his peak in terms of Marvel Comics, in terms of Marvel characterization, we're going to be also ranging that, as well as his low to mid-tier ends. The most consistent one that we're going to take in relation to how he would actually stack up is, of course, going to be the mid-end. But like I said, we're going to be going over everything in relation to his stats, potentially the high end as well as the lowest end that we can possibly get him. With the first category of analysis that we're going to be going over being strength and his attack potency. Now, in relation to this lowest end, you can get Santa Claus actually unironically around the small country to even country level. Now, of course, there have been nerds aside from me who have already done these calculations. You can easily look them up on any type of wiki page related to it. Mostly they follow the trend of articles that have put Santa Claus's abilities and level around that area because of his satchel. Now, his satchel is a very unique property in terms of his overall abilities, because I think that his satchel may be magically a part of him. So if he created it, that would also be going into his different hacks and abilities that he can actually produce, such as creating a satchel that can potentially hold an infinite amount of presents. But the baseline for which we can calculate him within Marvel's timeline does have him set around that small country level to country level. This is due to the fact that when you calculate his speed, which we're going to get more into later, you have to remember that there's a lot of forces that go into the fact that he would be carrying around the satchel. Now, the satchel can range anywhere from a few 100,000 tons to potentially over 2 million tons. Keep in mind, he's delivering presents to everyone around the world. This is not just children, but also would include adults that would be directly related to his gift giving around the planet. So pretty much anyone who's on the earth is who he's going to be giving a gift to, regardless of their race, gender, or creed, pretty much following the similar story. And when you actually calculate that out, you can understand why. Taking into account that he would be swinging his sled around in regards to not only dodging things coming at him mid-air, but also maneuvering it through tight turns and tight spaces, especially since he's doing that at sub-relativistic speeds, massively hypersonic to even beyond the speed of light potentially, especially when it comes to the Marvel variant. You can understand why the amount of mass in which he would be generating through his kinetic force would be immense in regards to swinging around, again, around 2 million tons. And if we take the highest variant of his low end, he would be producing around 1.672 times 10 to the 23rd joules of energy. That is 39.96 tetatons of TNT. I mean, and could you honestly imagine getting hit with the sack at that speed? Keep in mind, he'd be slinging that around at the speed of light. So, or at least sub-relativistic towards the speed of light. We'll get more into the speed calculation later. But again, we're using that as a baseline or considering it a low end in regards to his term of power. Now, related to the mid end, we can actually scale this upward, considering that Santa Claus has been known to tangle with people like Krampus, for instance. Krampus himself has been able to deal with characters in the Marvel Universe who range anywhere from those country levels to even potentially planet levels of power and beyond that. For instance, Krampus one time took on the trio of Danny Rand, Luke Cage, and Damian Hellstorm, and was not only able to roughly overcome these characters, but even do some severe damage. Now, if you actually know anything about these characters, they all range within those high levels of power. I mean, Luke Cage on a number of occasions has even been compared to the Hulk in terms of his overall ability. And Danny Rand at one of his maximum outputs, small country levels, or at least multi-city levels of power in regards to his complete amp. With characters like Damian Hellstorm having had such high level potency within the past, given his connections in history. I won't go over all of it here, but he has been able to even show up towards planetary levels of power. However, you could acknowledge the idea that that is somewhat inconsistent and is based on the writer's preference, depending on the story that they're trying to tell. But considering that these are often life and death situations, including the one that they were facing to with Krampus, you can understand why he might be using some of those more higher ends in terms of his overall ability, including the fact that Damian is not a character known for holding back, especially when his temper is inflared. And you even have to consider the fact that how Krampus was able to injure Damian was through an attack that should have otherwise been ineffectual against him, given that it's an attack based around fire. So take that for what you will. I mean, he is pretty much a character who's otherwise immune to most types of fire and can produce fire in the highest degrees, considering he can produce even hellfire. But what makes this even more special is the fact that characters like Krampus have been compared and shown to be able to handle characters like Robbie Reyes, who you may know as one of the more recent iterations of the Ghost Rider. And he in fact is actually potentially one of the strongest variants of the Ghost Rider to ever exist, especially when you account for his higher levels of powers and amps that he has received over comic history. Him often being in the conversation of power when even compared to one of my favorite Ghost Riders of all time, that being Johnny Blaze, who in my opinion is still objectively the strongest variant of Ghost Rider that we have ever seen. Nevertheless, what makes this more impressive is that Santa Claus was actually able to one-shot Krampus, essentially taking him out, and if Krampus is compared at any conceivable level to the more mid to low ends, or even potentially higher ends of characters like Damian and Robbie, then we're looking at a whole other beast when it comes to Santa's level of power. But you can clearly put Robbie at his most consistent around those high planetary ranges of power, to potentially a little bit beyond that, to getting up to even those star ranges of power, which all things considered is a good scale to pretty much put Santa at, as he hasn't really had a lot of feats to where he gets to showcase a lot of his overall physical capacity in terms of his attack potency, but he's more so good with his hacks, which does increase the overall range and does have the higher extent when it comes to his capacity for being able to utilize his attack power in the most efficient way possible. Now, of course, that would be taken from the stance of a mid-end. So again, with a low end, you have Santa anywhere between small country to potentially those high country levels of power. And with a mid to consistent end, he's pretty much ranking around those planetary, small planet, or even star levels of power. And then when it comes to a direct comparison in terms of relation to his abilities or even potential power, he's even been in the ballpark of being called, or at least related to characters like Odin. which is why this next part relating to his high end is going to be so much more impressive. Keep in mind, Santa, at least for Marvel Comics, is generally based around the idea of belief. Like, belief is what manifests through human consciousness and energy in order to create a character like him. Now, according to Santa, this may not be entirely true, as he may be a type of character that already existed before that, but it's at least something that he posits towards the idea. So maybe that's what he's comparing himself to Odin to. And there's nothing necessarily disputing that, especially if he's going to consider himself in the ballpark of the gods. This next part makes more sense. As I did mention, Robbie Reyes is potentially one of the most powerful Ghost Riders who ever exists, considering that Robbie Reyes was able to tangle with and ultimately overcome Dark Celestials. Now, the Celestials tend to be a strong range of power when it comes to Marvel Comics, but even their lowest ends still have them in the high universal to multiversal ranges. But when you're talking about the Dark Celestials, you're reaching a whole new level of power. Potentially, this could rank Santa, especially if you want to include his conversation with Odin being a recommendation towards power. Considering that Odin himself has been able to shake the multiverse in a battle before, it does seem to stand to reason the idea that if Santa is considering himself in the conversation with Odin, then absolutely you can say that potentially Santa at his high end range anywhere from complex multiversal to potentially even those hyperversal levels of power. And this also goes in relation to his durability, because I see nothing that says that Santa Claus's durability does not equalize towards his power, especially once again considering that he was fighting characters like Krampus, who again can also equate their power and durability to being one with each other. Now moving on to Santa's speed, it's a little bit more easy to calculate because, as I pointed out before, he's pretty much within those massively hypersonic to subrelativistic categories when it comes to a range of his overall speed. Now, I know people are going to say that, well, he's utilizing his sled, but keep in mind this is also equated to his own speed, as not only is he taking physical action during that, but he would also happen to be controlling that. It's not like his sleigh is just slingshotted across the entirety of the planet. He has to actually maneuver it around in order to dodge incoming traffic, like, birds, planes, etc. So this would also equate to his speed, as he would have to be moving consistently with his sled in order to be able to avoid any onset incoming dangers. Especially if we're talking about the Marvel Comics variant, who, especially around the time of year in which he would be delivering presents, would most likely run into other flyers, people who would be flying around the planet at the same time. With Santa Claus himself admitting in an interview that once he actually gets going, he's actually able to give Quicksilver a run for his money, with Quicksilver speed definitely being counted within the FTL levels of speed, considering that he has done things like outrun waves. And then, of course, you had to also calculate the fact that, once again, we're going to be using people like Robbie Reyes as a comparison. The fact that he is able to be tagged by characters within the ballpark of Santa and Krampus, then that means that Santa would obviously be equated to some level of speed. Now, you could be arguing that the idea that Robbie's not going in his full totality of speed, and that's perfectly fine. But when considering that he would be in a battle format, I think he would try to be his best, especially if he doesn't want a character to tag him, to utilize the more maximum levels of his speed. This could put Santa from a low end to massively hypersonic, a mid end to faster than light, and to a high end massively faster than light. And pretty much that'll do it for the overall totality of his physical stats that we can put him at least right now. And this is only due to the fact that although he has appeared several times within Marvel Comics, and even especially in recent years, he hasn't really shown a lot more than this. It's not like Santa's a fighter type character. Usually whenever he's going to show up, it's going to be a sort of lighthearted special episode. This is going to teach you something about values and lessons, and where Santa may show some weirdo ability, it won't be anything too out of the question. But to get the more minor ones out of the way, they won't really take an effect inside of this battle because they're not as applicable to the outcome of it as some of his other abilities would be. That being, for instance, his longevity. Now, Santa Claus, for the most part, is immortal, but he is not immune to things like physical damage and stuff of that nature. He does have high level resistance to physical damage, but you can still get rid of him. Now, I know what I said about his abstract existence, that may mean that he can come back like he's an idea or whatever, but for the nature of this battle, especially with them being in a neutral space where that won't really come into play, because that is more like a plot thing based around the idea that in Marvel Comics, as he would describe himself, he is that type of creature. So he does have longevity to be able to exist because he's existed for centuries. He even points this out in relation to his to characters like Wolverine, given the fact that he's even lived longer than he has, and has pretty much looked the same that entire time. So some other abilities that won't really take an effect in regards to helping Santa with the outcome of this battle would be things like his flight, because Goku has flight too, and so it won't really take that much of an effect because it'll just be something that will be a part of his equipment, given the fact that we will be giving him his reindeer, so he will be able to fly like that. But then again, like I said, Goku can also fly, so it won't really take that much of an effect. His perception being a lot higher, he has extrasensory perception. He is able to actually tell things about you. And the reason why I said that won't take effect, because even if he knows that Goku's a Saiyan or whatever, what benefit would that do for him? It wouldn't really give him any insight to who Goku is as a person or how to counter his abilities. It would just be he now knows that Goku's a Saiyan, and then with his fourth wall break ability anyway, he would probably come to that conclusion because it would be just outsider information. But he was able to utilize this ability within Marvel Comics consistently, so it's something that is there, but it's not really something that's all too effective or going to affect the outcome, because essentially it's his ability that he also gains in mythology to know things like when you're sleeping, or know when you're awake, or know if you've been good or bad. And another ability that's going to be practically useless to him would be his ability to project his perception of himself onto others. Essentially what he can do is manipulate his presence towards people, which is why he can appear to people of different races as that race, is why he can appear differently for everybody who sees him. And so, for instance, Goku may look at him and see a Saiyan, but that wouldn't really do anything, as Goku has the ability to sense energy and would know that it's not a Saiyan's energy. You can obviously even argue that this is somewhat of an illusionary ability, so Goku being able to see through illusions, it probably wouldn't help. He'd probably just be able to look at Santa, and even if he did see another Saiyan, just be like, oh, hey, look, it's a fellow Saiyan with a white beard and a red suit. Another thing would be his empathic and morality manipulation, because Goku's already good, so there's nothing there. So it's not like Santa's going to be able to use that, because Santa usually only ever really uses that ability when somebody is like evil or bad or struggling with life. He is able to empathize with them and utilize the ability to put them in a more calming state and a less moody mood, or completely shift their moral centers altogether. But what would making Goku evil benefit him? If anything, you can argue that that might be even worse, because if Goku's evil and you're taking him out of character here, then he might just straight up kill Santa without any remorse before the battle even gets started. So if you want to sit there and acknowledge that as an ability that he could use that would be beneficial, I would question you, because I don't know how it would be him shifting Goku's morality. Now, the empathy part of trying to calm Goku down could potentially work, but Goku usually fights in a calm state anyway. Super Saiyan Blue is naturally a calm state of mind. That's kind of the whole purpose of something like Super Saiyan Blue, in order to better control and utilize your power. So Goku has already known that. He's known that through battle meditation and things of that nature, so he already knows how to put himself at a state of tranquility and peace. This is especially true if he utilizes something like Ultra Instinct, because the manga's version of it, before Goku adapted and mastered it, you need to have a calm and tranquil heart. So Santa doing that to him would unironically again make Goku stronger. And now we're going to be getting into the actual abilities that will be able to help Santa during this battle, the abilities that are actually going to be effective against Goku. That being, starting off with the fact that Santa has a little level of weapons masteries. Now, he doesn't have a mastery over every single solitary weapon, but in regards to weapons that we've seen him use, like his crooked cane and a gun, even at one particular point in the comics, unironically, he does seem to have a quite high level of proficiency with them, and can even use things like energy to replace normal ammo to be able to utilize through his gun. So you could argue that it's a blast of magic or magical energy, but the whole point is that he can project energy through weapons that he would be utilizing. But to his credit, he would more than make up for that lack with his next ability, that being probability manipulation. Now, this is only shown a handful of times and very briefly, but Santa has the unique ability to manipulate probabilities and things, such as giving somebody extreme good luck, like he done for one man who was down on his luck, and it was around Christmas time, and so he essentially just increases overall potential of good luck. Now, this would be something that's very good in battle, because it is for anything. Like if Goku's throwing a punch at Santa, the likelihood that Goku will miss that punch raises as long as Santa's utilizing this ability. So it would actually be very beneficial, especially since we'll be also taking the higher ends of Santa's power. He could extenuate this to full-on reality manipulation. But moving right along, Santa also has the ability to teleport. He most famously used this in their interaction with She-Hulk, where he was able to teleport across whole continents in a single instance. She notes herself that this is essentially teleportation and not just some type of illusion or some type of speed relation or them flying, that it was directly teleportation because no time had changed, no time had passed. They just suddenly moved from one space to the other. So this is 100% just teleportation, and he moved from her office building all the way to Australia, if I'm not mistaken. However, this would also be again beneficial in conjunction for Santa, his teleportation, along with his ability to travel dimensionally. Not only can he dimensionally travel, but given that his satchel is essentially a dimensional space. I touched on this briefly earlier, but yes, his satchel would essentially house multiple tons of presents for everybody around the entirety of the world. Now, considering that in Marvel, there's about roughly around the same amount of people that we have on the earth right now, so that's about 7 billion to 8 billion people that he would have to be delivering presents to. And so yeah, having those abilities such as dimensional storage, where he can just store anything he wants inside his satchel, potentially to a near infinite degree, would also come in handy if he needs to pull out a weapon or something like that to utilize against Goku. Now, I don't know how extreme this could be. I mean, we haven't really seen him use it for anything super grandiose, but it would be something of note considering the fact that this is also in conjunction with his ability to dimensionally travel, as I said earlier, that would help him with teleportation. Now, the next ability I'm going to put up there is transmutation. So essentially, like Buhan, he does have the ability to turn you into other things. This is something that he actually used against the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants when they were battling against the X-Men at one particular point in time. Santa just essentially grabbed all of them and transformed them into toys. So in all reality, this could be something that could affect Goku as well. Now, of course, like I said, when we'll touch on Goku, we'll touch on any counters or hacks that he may have against something like this, but I'm just talking about in a general context for this battle. This would be something that would be actually very useful to Santa, especially if he's able to get a hold of Goku. He could just potentially straight up just turn him into a toy, step on him or crush him, and end the fight that way. Now, the next ability that he will be able to use will be power nullification. To the degree in which he can utilize this is very isolated and specific, considering that one of the only times we ever see Santa using this is when he's offering She-Hulk her humanity back, essentially as a gift or a present, that he is able to potentially nullify the gamma radiation that grants her her powers. So like I said, it's somewhat Pacific, and we don't know if he could just make Goku stop being a Saiyan, because the access to Goku's power comes from the fact that he can channel ki. But he does get natural abilities from being a Saiyan that would make him extraordinarily strong and more powerful than your standard run-of-the-mill human. So even if he could, like, take away the Saiyan side of it, Goku would still have access to ki. Now, he'll be significantly weaker and lose access to a lot of his transformations, which would greatly diminish his power. So I'm not saying that it's not useful, I'm just saying that although it is useful, it might be very specific. I wouldn't even consider it outright power nullification. It's just more something like power dampening or something along the lines of that, but it is still a beneficial ability that he would be able to utilize. Now, in regards to his next ability, we're going to go over two. That's going to be his memory manipulation and his size manipulation. Now, in regards to memory manipulation, in the same issue that I was talking about where he turned the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants into toys, he essentially was able to wipe the events from the memories of even the X-Men. So he wiped everyone's memories of the event. It's directly said that that's what he did. This could be beneficial in the sense that he could wipe Goku's memories. Now, what do I mean by that? Depending on the extent to which he can wipe memories, he could make Goku forget about everything, how to utilize his power, everything about his life, when he achieved these forms, stuff like that. And if Goku forgets how to utilize his power, well, he'll just be a silly duck. So it could be something that I would see very useful for this fight. And in relation to size manipulation, it's just the ability to make things grow bigger, or, change them from their original size, to make them smaller or bigger. Nothing too impressive, but it is possibly the idea that he can utilize this on himself, which would give him at least a size benefit in the fight. So it can be beneficial, but Goku has dealt with that before. So not too beneficial, but beneficial enough to be mentioned. And the last ability that we're going to go over that Santa Claus would have access to would be his ability to control technology. Now, the reason why I didn't put this into the category of not going to be useful against Goku is because Santa would have technology of his own. His satchel has a potentially infinite array of presents and things inside of it that he could utilize. And so if somebody's like, oh, I wish for a plasma rifle, or I wish for a gravity gun, then potentially that can be within his satchel. I won't guarantee that he'll have that, but, you know, let's say somebody says, oh, I wish that Santa would give me Excalibur. You know, it could potentially be there. So he could have an array of technology that he could utilize. And one of the ways in which we see him do that is when he helps Captain Marvel out of a bind, which, depending on what you want to consider, because he gets out of power dampening cuffs. Now, depending on what you want to consider in terms of Captain Marvel's levels of power, this can also help further confirm where he is in terms of a mid-tier of his attack potency, because Captain Marvel has been consistently within those star ranges of power. And again, this is where I put Santa at too. So if you want to equate it to that, then you absolutely can, considering that the power cuffs would have had to be adjusted to control somebody with that level of power. And so if that is indeed the case, then you could potentially say that Santa has the ability to destroy or get rid of cuffs that can block off star levels of power, which would also again confirm his levels of attack potency to be within those ranges as a consistent mid-tier. And pretty much that's it in relation to Santa. So you guys probably didn't know that he was this powerful. However, like I said, whether it's the low or whether it's the mid or whether it's the high end, Santa's pulling off some pretty big numbers. But now let's see how Goku stacks up against him. Alrighty gang, and moving right along to Goku, just like I said before previously, I'm not going to sit there and go into a deep dive breakdown. You guys have already heard many a times, so I'm just go over essentially the basics of what we know. Everyone already knows about the Beerus and Goku class. Everybody knows that feat, and even at the scaling of a low end, you can at least get that feat to 5th dimensional. How? Because as said many times throughout the Dragon Ball verse, and said directly by Goku himself, the idea is that the 4th dimensional aspect that we know as time does exist within the Dragon Ball construct. Now, I know that has changed recent in the scientific diction, but for the most part, we still assign the idea of the 4th dimensional plane of reality to be that of the time space, a space that contains time. Now, if we look at what Goku says about the 3rd dimensional realm, or what would be considered the living universe, he does apply that it is considered the temporal world as well, and that the existence of something like the afterlife would exist transcendently above something like that world. So for Goku to be able to affect it in his clash with Beerus, and not only that, but affect things outside of it, would at least be roughly around 4 to 6 dimensional in terms of his overall potency and power. This can easily rank him up to a low multiversal to potentially even complex multiversal level right then and there in regards to his overall power. Now, scaling upwards from that feat, you can even get Goku, if you just start scaling it like that, all the way to even 9th dimensional. Well, how can you do that, considering that there are multiple transcendent variants of this dimension in macrocosm, with things like timelines in both the manga and anime, Zamasu spreading throughout these timelines that are potentially countless, if not infinite, variations of the macrocosm, with Goku directly in the anime at least, positing the idea that if he just had one more sense being, he could essentially defeat Zamasu. So this can put him even upwards to that 9th dimensional tier at realms of power, up to those hyperversal realms of power. However, we're not going to sit there and do that. Now, I know that some people are going to consider this wank, and I know some people are going to sit there and try to downplay, but when it comes to consistent leveling around Goku, he does really scale to these higher forms of power, and there is no real format of contradiction, although many have tried. You can sit there and take it in both ways. I'm going to sit here and describe it to you the best way I can in relation to Goku's outer versal levels of power. So when you take into account, and if you don't lowball it, the consideration of the afterlife being beyond the physical transcendence and boundaries of dimensionality altogether. This is directly said, and you can find the original kanji for it anywhere. I mean, this is not really disputed by anybody who just isn't straight up downplaying. That in regards to several realms and aspects of which Goku can affect or destroy, such as even super dimensions and multiple clusters that can even destroy the living universe, which will already be high 4th dimensional level feats if you want to sit there and go there. You can talk about the fact that the afterlife is pretty much infinitely transcendent above dimensionality itself. That would automatically make the cosmology of the macrocosm an outerversal structure. There's no real ifs, ands, or buts about that, and if Goku is capable of destroying it, well, then you know. Now scaling that upwards with the same amount of feats, if you want to sit there and say that Goku could have potentially even defeated Infinite Zamasu, then you can say that potentially he can destroy a high level of these outerversal realms, making him easily into the high outer levels of power. And I really don't have to go further than that, but if you want to sit there and incorporate things like the World of Void that determine the power, or again, if you want to incorporate the idea of super
dimensions can be utilized. Ultimately, what you have here is either you take the scan at its face value and acknowledge the fact that the macrocosm is indeed an outerversal structure, or you sit there and try to downplay it and say that there are certain levels of inconsistencies within terms of Goku's being or his existence that would make this damn near impossible, in which case he would still get a pretty high level, it just wouldn't be as high as outerversal. All that being said, just to go over the idea of his low end, of his mid tier, and then of course his absolute high end.
So in terms of Goku's power, at a low end, you can say that he's pretty much around 4th to 5th dimensional, thus putting him around that low to multiversal range of power. For his mid end, you can easily get him within those complex multiversal levels to even those hyperversal and outerversal ranges of power. And for high end regarding Goku, it would definitely be in those outer plus, if not potentially high outer ranges of power. Now I know that some people try to incorporate the idea that there's certain levels to canonicity and that Super Goku can be applied to things like CC Goku, but this is just blatantly untrue. And it's just certifiable wank. Now look, we all love Goku, but let's not lie about him. There is clearly too many differences and inconsistencies between things like the game's logic and the other movies' logic, and between the logic of the anime and manga. When I say Super Goku, I will strictly just be considering Super Goku. Another way that you can also scale those power levels, and just in case you don't believe the afterlife scaling, and you don't think that Goku would automatically scale towards those things, you can even still use the Arali scaling. Now I know that this is more of a older tier piece of scaling that nobody really used because nobody really thought as much of it, but now that it's coming back into the zeitgeist of scaling that it can be used, you can argue for the fact that Goku, at least by the point of determinate power's beginning, would definitely still be within those outer ranges of power, if not close enough to it. This is due to the fact that Arali has several layers of fictional transcendence to her belt, and the ability to affect the author himself. In this case being Toribot, who is a direct avatar of Akira Toriyama. Which again is why I say that as a comfortable mid-end, Goku can range from those complex multiversals to potentially outerversal levels of power. But again, there is some debate, and I'm trying to take the best interpretation of it all. So once again, that is going to be going from low multi to high multi for the low end, complex multi to outer for the mid end, and finally for the high end, that would be outer plus to high outer. For speed, there's a little bit of complication there, but I wouldn't say it's as complicated as the strength and attack potency, but you can just pick from any random amount of feats that Goku has had. I mean, even since he was a kid, he was essentially dodging light beams. You can argue that even if you hadn't said he reached light as a child, he definitely reached light by the early stages of Dragon Ball, and definitely beyond light, given the fact that he has relativistic feats when compared to Piccolo's feat, like blowing up the moon. And then of course the fact that Goku would obviously even scale to massively faster than light by keeping up with things like his spaceship, and even moving faster while he fought Frieza on Namek to be even faster than what King Kai could see. And then of course you have his clashes with Beerus, but even before then you also have the fact that he flew between dimensions and realms and crossed great distances. All of this would range pretty much from the faster than light to massively faster than light. And finally we start getting into moving past the whole massively faster than light scale, all the way up to the infinite and of course immeasurable speed categories. And one feat you could direct yourself towards for that category would be the fact that Goku was able to move in an empty void. It's essentially devoid of even potentially the concept of time and space, because it had been eroded away and utterly obliterated and erased by none other than Zeno. So the fact that Goku was able to move in essentially a timeless void or a realm without time definitely does have some higher elevations in terms of his scaling to be able to compare him to. You can honestly just say that Goku would still be massively faster than light even at a low end, and at a mid and high end, pretty much speed almost becomes virtually irrelevant towards Goku, since he's still ranked within those infinite to immeasurable speeds. and we're going to be going over Goku's hacks and abilities. Now, actually quite a few of these hacks and abilities he does ultimately end up sharing with Santa Claus, so we might hear some repetition there, mainly around the physical stat category because they're both essentially superhuman. Well, they're way beyond the level of superhuman, but you guys get what I mean. And as I have went over both of their stats, you can see that these guys are incredibly strong, fast, and quite durable. So that's all going to pretty much tie in with each other. Although it's not exactly at the same level, they both still have the ability to access such great immense levels of power. And through Ki, Goku has also been able to utilize an immense array and arsenal in terms of his abilities, which is primarily where Goku gets his powers from in relation to the series of Dragon Ball itself, that being Ki. Ki is the foundational energy for literally everything, and one of the baseline powers that it can give you once you learn how to master it is the ability to even fly. So he does share that with Santa Claus too, but whereas Santa does need his sleigh, Goku could just simply fly on his own. But the primary usage that he has for Ki would be that of energy projection, which he uses in a wide variety of attacks, like the Destructo Disc, the Kamehameha Wave, the Solar Flare, the Ki Volley, the After Image, etc. These are all a myriad of different ways that he utilizes his energy, and once he got tapped into God energy or God Ki, he was able to not only amplify these levels of attacks, but also increase his arsenal and overall range, such as with techniques like the God Bind, self-replication, barrier creation, and even techniques like the Hakai. Goku's Ki doesn't just act like an all-encompassing power that he can use for a general purpose. He can also use it in a myriad of different ways to give himself extraordinary abilities, such as the ability to read minds, utilize telekinesis, or even enhance himself physically, like with techniques such as the Kaioken, which overly amplifies Goku to even a times 20 level boost in terms of his overall stats and abilities. Goku, like Santa Claus, even has extraordinary sensory perception. This allows him to go beyond the physical senses and utilize something known as the Ki sense, which grants him great spatial awareness to be able to sense life forms and life essence and energies from different points throughout a wide given area, depending on the extent of which his range of power will allow for him to do. This awareness will allow him to do things like being able to fight in the dark, see through illusions, discern between good and evil, and even be able to make discernments between someone's feelings. He can also utilize this against his opponent to be able to gauge their level and level of attacks, so that way he will better know how to defend against them. Goku has elevated his Ki sense so much that he can actually somewhat discern attacks before they even happen, giving him a pseudo-clairvoyance. Another ability that Goku has is his mimicry technique. This technique allows him to essentially adapt to an opponent or be able to utilize their techniques that he sees and be able to replicate and copy them. Although he may not be able to do it perfectly the first time, see the fact that he was only able to use an imperfect version of the Hakai when he first got a hold of it. For the most part, it doesn't take Goku any more than a short amount of time to be able to replicate any attack that he pretty much sees, as long as he wants to add it to his specific repertoire. This is of such a high level that he can actually create new techniques on top of that, such as when him and Beerus were clashing, and we all know about the infamous clash, to where not only was he able to replicate Beerus' own punch, but he was able to make a specifically new type of counterpunch, the idea of neutralizing Beerus' punch. Beerus himself even acknowledging that Goku is very good at coming up with new techniques on the fly, and that he's essentially a natural prodigy. Now, of course, another thing that's a part of Goku's arsenal in terms of his overall attacks are his ability to utilize transformations. Each transformation having a varying degree in terms of raising his overall combat ability and general proficiency when it comes to utilizing his techniques. Of course, the most famous of that being the Super Saiyan series, which does go up to the third stage as far as Goku is able to use them. But Akira Toriyama himself has posited the idea that in relation to the Super Saiyan transformations past a certain point in the series, they were no longer able to be mathematically calculated, and so therefore the numbers I'm going to give you right now are just to be taken at face value and with a heavy grain of salt, not meant to be taken as a literal interpretation of gospel as to the range in which they can produce in terms of power. But for Super Saiyan 1, this would grant an overall 50 times multiplier, for Super Saiyan 2, this would grant an overall 100 times multiplier, and for Super Saiyan 3, this would grant an overall 400 times multiplier to Goku's baseline power for each transformation. With him then being able to stack the God forms on top of this, and considering that the God form was able to accelerate Goku to the point of where he was able to destroy realms of infinity above where his power was in the Buu Saga, that being the fact that he was capable of destroying the macrocosm, which no matter how you splice it, where you look at it from a low end or where you look at it from a high end, it's still pretty impressive considering that I know a lot of people try to measure, but there really is no measurement for the Super Saiyan God. If we really wanted to argue it, we can argue the idea that it is an information that granted Goku potentially infinite levels of power in terms of an overall boost. And then you would have Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan, or Super Saiyan Blue, which would be just stacking on another multiplier of times 50, but what do you stack onto infinity? That wouldn't make it any more than infinity. Goku can also stack on Kaioken with this, which does make it an even greater boost of stacking on Kaioken all the way up to a Kaioken times 20. This was his peak for a while until the Tournament of Power kicked in, where Goku ultimately achieved another infinite limit-breaking power known as Ultra Instinct. Now, this is where the manga and anime differ a little bit, because whereas the manga, Ultra Instinct is primarily a technique that depends on the user's emotional state and having a tranquil and calm state of mind. Now, in the anime, that is somewhat applied, but considering that Goku is very emotional when he's utilizing it, and it doesn't seem to affect the form whatsoever, most likely in the anime, it is primarily a transformation on top of being a state of mind and technique. Either way you want to go with it, Goku's ability within this allows him to essentially be able to, in a layman's term, auto-dodge pretty much any attack and oncoming attack. He not only has the ability to counter those attacks, but he can essentially release a perfect version of an attack to be able to counter the attack. Ultra Instinct is the ultimate style of combat, essentially even allowing Goku to predict and counter attacks that would be virtually unseen, or normally unable to be countered. Now, before we continue, there is one technique that I did not go over, but pretty much like Santa Claus, Goku also has this ability, which was teleportation. The reason why I didn't go over it was because I kind of did address it during my Santa Claus portion of the video. But essentially, Goku does have a teleportation technique known as the instant transmission, which works alongside of his ki sense. That meaning that he has the ability to be able to track any source of energy, and then he can teleport to that energy as long as there is energy to be able to be tracked. This can somewhat be mitigated if it's a high enough dimensional structure between Goku, or there's not enough energy to be able to sense around, or there's a specific type of dimension that he can't necessarily sense through. However, as long as there's any level of energy around that Goku can't pick up on, he will be able to teleport to that. No questions asked. Whew, now that was a lot. But we're not done. We still got two more abilities to pretty much go over. That, of course, being Goku's adaptation ability, and of course, one of the most famous abilities that he also has, that all Saiyans have, that being the Zenkai boost. So let's address his adaptation and the Zenkai boost. Goku's adaptation is essentially a combat experience, and in terms of a combat form, that will allow a Saiyan to be able to grow in battle. The reason why I say Saiyan, despite this fact that this is not necessarily unique to Saiyans, it is unique in a specific way when regards to Saiyans. I mean that as the battle goes on, Goku will not only get stronger, but he would also be able to adapt to his opponent in a myriad of ways, even if it's not technically copying or reutilizing a different version of the attack, but also when, as I mentioned before, he wants to create a new technique in order to be able to specifically counter or just utilize against his opponent in order to be able to stop them. And as far as the Zenkai boost is concerned, this is something where the manga and anime will also differ, as Vegeta does posit the idea, even though this is somewhat loose when it comes to understanding it, but he just posits the idea that due to Goku and his age, he will no longer be receiving Zenkai boost. But again, this is really no effect in the anime, as in the anime, Vegeta, when he comes to that, continues to posit the idea that they have no limits, that Saiyans can continue to bypass their limitable constraints or whatever limits they may be having at the time. And the way that the Zenkai boost works means that after they take a certain amount of damage and come back from that damage at full health, they will be insurmountably stronger than what they were before. This is especially high when it comes to experiences of near death. Alrighty guys, and so there you go. That is the analysis for both Goku and Santa Claus out of the way, and it kind of gives you an overall general gist of what they can do and how they will be stacking up against each other within this battle. And now on to the actual battle itself. And if you guys have heard the analysis up until this point, you pretty much know who I think wins. Even when giving the best of interpretations to Santa Claus here, and saying that he is within those high hyperversal ranges of power, it ultimately wouldn't do anything against Goku, because even at a mid-end, Goku would still be more than enough to handle Santa Claus. And given the fact that their abilities do somewhat counter each other in specific ways, it doesn't really guarantee that Santa will win, because I know some people are going to argue, well, if he's at that high of a level, if I want to take the low-end version of Goku, then he would have a good chance of overcoming him, given the fact that Goku cannot mitigate an ability or be immune to an ability that he cannot overcome. So stuff like Santa Claus's transmutation abilities could be a necessarily instant win card. But considering that Goku is overwhelmingly stronger, if not equal to him, and this is starting from a base, like the mid-end of Goku is pretty much what base Goku can do in terms of his overall power. This is especially true after the Battle of Gods movie due to the fact that Goku got Saiyan beyond God, meaning that all that macrocosm destroying power that Goku possessed when he had Super Saiyan God for the first time, he would possess even in his base, meaning that the mid-range for Goku in terms of his power that I was calculating from Super Saiyan God could be equated to Goku's base levels of power, regardless of if you want to take it from a low end or high end. And then on top of that, Goku can also stack on transformations, and you pretty much get a wash. As with Santa Claus, the best that I can do for him in terms of the calculation of his overall speed is get him up to massively faster than light. So let's say you could say that all things were equal in terms of power and durability. Well, he would never catch Goku. With Goku having things like transformations to be able to stack on top of that, even if it's equal for a time in terms of power, ultimately he would still be able to go past Santa. And so a lot of Santa's abilities Goku's going to develop immunities to and adapt away from, essentially being able to overcome them, if not outright mimic them. Not to mention, he already shares quite a lot of those abilities already. But if we're taking low end to mid end to high end for each one of them, low end to low end, Santa Claus again is within those country ranges of power, and Goku as low end would be within those low multiversal ranges of power. Yeah, you do the math on that. There's pretty much no way that Santa will be able to overcome him. And at a mid end to mid end, again, even if you want to sit there and ignore my scaling and think that I'm absolutely wrong, you can't say that Goku's below something like a complex multiversal. He still would be within those 6-dimensional ranges of power, and would put him above Santa Claus, who's within those planetary ranges of power. Even if you want to say that Goku was only universal, that would still be immensely above anything that Santa Claus could do at a mid-end. And then at a high end, it's a lot closer, of course, that being if we're taking the absolute and saying that Santa Claus is within those high hyperversal levels of power, scaling him off of characters who could potentially reach those levels, it still wouldn't matter because a high end for Goku makes him well into high outer potentially. So even if you want to say he's only 3 layers into outer, it doesn't matter. If he's anywhere near outer, then he's infinitely above Santa Claus, because Santa Claus would be at hyperversal, whereas Goku would be at outerversal. And so ultimately, nothing that Santa's going to be able to do here is going to affect Goku in any conceivable way. Goku just has too many win cons, especially throughout the ranges of power and speed. And the fact that he not only can counter Santa's attacks, but potentially even mimic them and utilize a better version of them against him, it just ultimately makes this a wash. And so with that being said, I do hope you guys once again enjoy your Christmas, spend time with your families, and this won't be the final video for the year, okay? This is going to be just my Christmas video. The final video for the year is going to be the next part of the what if. That, of course, being that what if Goku had the Akari state. And so that would be the final video of the year. But, of course, I just again want you guys to have a Merry Christmas, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.